Amelia Crawford stood on the wooden platform of the train station in Little Rock, Arkansas, clutching a telegram that promised her a teaching position in a small town called Benton, though the paper in her hands felt more like a lifeline than a simple job offer. Behind her lay nothing but heartbreak and shattered dreams, a failed engagement to a banker's son who had promised her the world and delivered only lies wrapped in expensive paper. She had learned the hard way that love was nothing more than a pretty story told to naive girls, a fairy tale that existed only in dime novels and the imaginations of foolish romantics. At 23 years old, she considered herself neither foolish nor romantic anymore, just practical and determined to build a life that depended on no one but herself. The year was 1882. And the July heat pressed down on her like a heavy blanket as she waited for the local train that would take her the final 20 miles to Benton. Sweat trickled down her back beneath her high-necked traveling dress, and she longed to loosen her collar, but propriety demanded she maintain appearances even when melting in the oppressive summer heat. Around her, other travelers fanned themselves and complained about the delay. But Amelia simply stood in silence, her 2 worn carpetbags at her feet containing everything she owned in the world. When the train finally arrived with a screech of brakes and a cloud of steam, she climbed aboard with a sense of finality. This was her fresh start, her chance to prove that a woman could make her own way without relying on false promises of love and devotion. The schoolhouse in Benton needed a teacher, and she needed purpose. It seemed like a fair exchange. The countryside rolled past her window, all green fields and dense forests broken by the occasional farmstead. Arkansas in summer was lush and alive, so different from the gray city streets of Memphis where she had grown up. Perhaps that was good. Everything here would be different, including her. Benton turned out to be smaller than she had imagined. A collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street that turned to mud when it rained and dust when it did not. The train station was barely more than a covered platform, and as she stepped down with her bags, she found herself standing in the full force of the afternoon sun with no welcoming committee in sight. The telegram had said someone from the school board would meet her, but the platform was empty except for a skinny boy loading crates onto a wagon. "Excuse me," she called to him. "Could you direct me to the schoolhouse?" The boy looked up, eyes widening at the sight of her city clothes and carefully pinned hair. "Yes, madam. Straight down Main Street past the Mercantile and the saloon. Cannot miss it. Big white building with a bell tower." She thanked him and hefted her bags, starting down the dusty street with determination. People stopped to stare as she passed, which was to be expected in a small town. She kept her chin high and her eyes forward, refusing to let curiosity make her self-conscious. The schoolhouse appeared just as the boy had described, a fresh painted building that clearly held pride of place in the community. Relief flooded through her as she climbed the steps and tried the door, finding it unlocked. Inside, the single large room smelled of chalk and wood polish. Rows of desks faced a blackboard at the front, and afternoon light streamed through tall windows. It was simple and clean, and for the first time since leaving Memphis, Amelia felt something almost like hope stirring in her chest. This she could do. This she could manage. "You must be Miss Crawford." She turned to find a portly man in a dark suit standing in the doorway, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "I am. You are from the school board." "Reverend Thomas, madam. I serve on the board and also pastor the church next door. I apologize for not meeting you at the station." "Emergency with the Fletcher family. One of their children took ill." He stuffed the handkerchief back in his pocket and extended his hand. "Welcome to Benton. I hope you will be happy here." His handshake was firm and brief. his manner businesslike as he showed her around the schoolhouse and explained her duties. 27 students ranging from ages 6 to 15. School 6 days a week from September through May. Salary of $30 a month plus room and board. The room and board would be provided by Mrs. Henderson, a widow who ran a boarding house on the edge of town. "I know you must be tired from your journey," Reverend Thomas said, leading her back outside where the heat hit them like a wall. "Let me walk you to Mrs. Henderson so you can settle in." School does not start until September 1st, which gives you 6 weeks to prepare. 6 weeks in a strange town where she knew no one. 6 weeks to prove she had made the right decision in running away from her old life. Amelia nodded and followed him down the street, her bags growing heavier with each step. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a cheerful woman in her 50s with flour on her apron and a kind smile. She showed Amelia to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor, with a window overlooking the vegetable garden and a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt. "Supper is at 6, Mrs. Henderson said. "We have 3 other boarders, all respectable folk. The washroom is at the end of the hall, and I ask that you keep your room tidy. You are welcome to use the parlor in the evenings if you like." After she left, Amelia sank onto the bed and allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. She had done it. She had actually left everything behind and started fresh. The reality of it settled over her like that quilt, both comforting and suffocating at once. That evening at supper, she met her fellow boarders. Mr. Peterson, who worked at the bank and spoke very little. Miss Sarah, a spinster who worked at the mercantile and spoke far too much. And Mr. Ethan Vance, who ran a cattle ranch outside of town and rarely stayed in Benton more than a few days at a time. Ethan Vance caught her attention immediately, though she tried not to let it show. He was tall and weathered, probably near 30, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. He wore work clothes to the dinner table, which made Miss Sarah sniff disapprovingly, but he seemed entirely unconcerned with her opinion. When Mrs. Henderson introduced Amelia as the new schoolteacher, he nodded politely and said, "Welcome to Benton, Miss Crawford. I hope you will find it to your liking." His voice was deep and quiet, with a hint of Texas drawl that suggested he had not always lived in Arkansas. She murmured her thanks and focused on her plate, determined not to be drawn in by a handsome face and courteous manner. She had learned that lesson already. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Amelia spent her time at the schoolhouse, organizing supplies and planning lessons. Benton was quiet in the summer, with most people focused on their farms and businesses. She ventured out only for necessities, buying a few items at the mercantile and politely declining Miss Sarah's invasive questions about her background. It was a week after her arrival when she encountered Ethan Vance again. She was leaving the mercantile with her purchases when she heard a commotion in the street. A horse had gotten loose from its hitching post and was dancing nervously in the middle of the road, eyes rolling white with fear. The owner, an elderly man, was trying to catch the reins but only making the animal more agitated. Before Amelia could think better of it, she set down her packages and moved toward the horse, speaking in a low, soothing voice. She had grown up around horses despite living in the city, had spent summers at her uncle's farm and learned that gentleness worked better than force. The horse's ears flicked toward her as she approached, and she kept talking, nonsense words that were more about tone than content. Just as she reached for the trailing reins, a firm hand caught her elbow and pulled her back. She turned indignantly to find Ethan Vance beside her, his expression stern. "Begging your pardon, Miss Crawford, but that is not a good idea. That horse is spooked and could kick." "I grew up around horses, Mr. Vance. I know what I am doing." "Maybe so, but folks in town do not know that. They see a lady schoolteacher getting hurt, and there would be hell to pay. Before she could argue, he released her arm and moved past her toward the horse. Within moments, he had the reins and was stroking the animal's neck, murmuring words she could not quite hear. The horse calmed almost instantly, pressing its nose against his shoulder like an old friend. The elderly owner hurried over with effusive thanks, and Ethan waved them away, handing over the reins with a gentle reminder to check the hitching not more carefully next time. Then he turned back to Amelia, who was still standing where he had left her, torn between gratitude and irritation. "I apologize for grabbing you," he said, retrieving her packages from where she had set them. "But I would rather offend your sensibilities than see you hurt. I appreciate your concern, but I assure you it was unnecessary." She took her packages back, trying to ignore how his work-roughened hands brushed against hers. "I am quite capable of taking care of myself." Something flickered in his eyes, amusement perhaps, or understanding. "I do not doubt it, Miss Crawford. But sometimes accepting help is not the same as admitting weakness. Sometimes it is just practical." He tipped his hat and walked away before she could formulate a response, leaving her standing in the dusty street with her packages, and a strange flutter in her chest that she absolutely refused to acknowledge as anything significant. That night at supper, she found herself watching him more than she should. He ate quietly, responding when spoken to but offering little conversation of his own. Miss Sarah clearly found him rude, but Amelia suspected he was simply reserved. There was a weariness around his eyes that spoke of hard work and long days, and she noticed the way his shoulders relaxed slightly as the meal went on, as if he was only just now allowing himself to rest. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Henderson said as she brought out dessert, "How long will you be staying in town this time?" "Just a few more days. I have business at the bank and some supplies to pick up, then I need to get back to the ranch. Got cattle to move before the weather turns." "In July?" Miss Sarah asked skeptically. "What weather could possibly turn? Late summer storms can be fierce, and I prefer to be prepared." His gaze flicked briefly to Amelia. "Besides, my foreman is more than capable, but I do not like leaving him alone too long. Too much work for one man. You should hire more help, Mrs. Henderson suggested, not for the first time judging by his patient expression. "Good help is hard to find. Most men who want ranch work have already got it, and I am particular about who I bring on. Takes a certain kind of person to handle the isolation." Amelia understood isolation. She had felt it keenly in Memphis, surrounded by people who thought they knew what was best for her. Sometimes, she thought, loneliness in a crowd was worse than being genuinely alone. After supper, she retreated to her room as usual, but the evening was too hot for comfort. She could hear the other boarders in the parlor below, Miss Sarah's voice rising and falling in some lengthy story. Instead of joining them, Amelia slipped out the back door into Mrs. Henderson's garden, seeking whatever breeze might be stirring. The garden was small but well tended, with rows of vegetables and a few struggling flowers. A wooden bench sat beneath a peach tree, and she sank onto it with relief, loosening the collar of her dress now that she was safely away from prying eyes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for a moment she let herself simply breathe. Running away from Miss Sarah, she jumped at the voice, turning to find Ethan Vance leaning against the garden fence, a cigarette between his fingers. In the fading light, he looked more relaxed than she had yet seen him, his usual careful reserve softened slightly. "I needed some air," she said, which was not exactly a lie. "The heat is oppressive. It will get worse before it gets better. August is the hardest month." He took a drag on the cigarette, the tip glowing red in the dimness. "You picked an interesting time to move to Arkansas." I did not have much choice in the timing. The position needed to be filled. He nodded slowly, not pressing for details she did not offer. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Amelia found it surprisingly comfortable. She had expected him to make conversation or try to fill the quiet, but he seemed content to simply exist in the same space, which was oddly refreshing. "Reverend Thomas says you run a cattle ranch," she said eventually, curious despite herself. "Is it far from town?" "About 10 miles north, near the Saline River. Good grazing land, plenty of water. I have about 300 head right now, plus a dozen horses." "That sounds like a lot of work for one man and a foreman." "It is, but I like the work. Keeps me busy, keeps me focused. Out there, things make sense. A cow is a cow, grass is grass. Nothing complicated about it." She heard the subtext in his words, the implication that other things in his life had been complicated, and she wondered what his story was. What had brought him to Arkansas, to this particular patch of land? But she did not ask because she did not want him asking the same of her. "I should head back inside," she said, standing and smoothing her skirts. "Thank you for the company, Mr. Vance." "Ethan," he said quietly. "If we are going to be sharing a supper table, you might as well call me Ethan, unless you prefer the formality." She hesitated, knowing that agreeing would somehow shift their dynamic from polite strangers to something more familiar, but refusing seemed silly and childish. "Amelia, then. Though perhaps not in front of Miss Sarah. I suspect she would find it scandalous." His rare smile appeared, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. "Miss Sarah finds most things scandalous. I would not worry too much about her opinion." As she walked back to the house, Amelia told herself firmly that the warmth spreading through her chest was simply relief at making a potential friend in this strange new town. Nothing more than that. She was not interested in romance or fairy tales or any of the pretty lies that men told. She had learned that lesson and she would not forget it. But over the next few days, she found herself looking forward to supper more than she should. Ethan was not always talkative, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. He listened more than he talked, and when she mentioned her concerns about teaching children of such varying ages, he offered practical suggestions from his own limited schooling. He had a quiet intelligence that impressed her, and a self-deprecating humor that surprised her. On his last evening before returning to the ranch, he found her again in the garden after supper. The heat had finally broken slightly, a breeze rustling through the peach tree leaves. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he said, standing a respectful distance away. "I will be back in town in a few weeks, but I am not sure exactly when. Depends on how the work goes. I hope it goes well for you." She meant it sincerely. "Thank you for making me feel welcome here. It has been kind of you." He shook his head slightly. "I have not done much of anything. But I am glad you are settling in. Benton is a good town, mostly good people. I think you will do well here." There was something in his tone, a certainty that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced before, as if he understood what she was running from without her having to explain it. "Ethan," she said impulsively, "why did you come to Arkansas? You sound like you are from somewhere else." "Texas originally. Near San Antonio. I came here about 5 years ago, bought the ranch from a man who was ready to retire. I needed a fresh start, somewhere no one knew me or my history." "I expect you understand that." She did, perhaps too well. "And have you found what you were looking for?" He considered the question seriously, his gaze drifting to the darkening sky. "Mostly. I have found peace, at least, purpose. The rest does not seem to matter as much as I thought it would." The rest? She wondered what that meant. Love, family, the kinds of connections that tied a person to more than just land and livestock. Before she could think of a tactful way to ask, he turned back to her with another of those rare smiles. "Take care of yourself, Amelia. I will see you when I see you." He left before dawn the next morning, and the boarding house seemed quieter without him. Amelia threw herself into her work, spending long hours at the schoolhouse preparing lesson plans and making the room as welcoming as possible. Reverend Thomas stopped by occasionally with advice or supplies, and gradually she began to meet more of the families whose children would be in her class. They were mostly farmers and shopkeepers, hard-working people who valued education but had little time for frivolity. August arrived with brutal heat and occasional thunderstorms that turned the streets to rivers of mud. Amelia stayed busy, but in her quiet moments, she found her thoughts drifting to Ethan and his ranch 10 miles away. She wondered if he was staying safe in the storms, if his cattle were thriving, if he ever thought about their conversations in the garden. Then she would scold herself for such foolishness and return to whatever task was at hand. It was mid-August when he returned to town, looking even more weathered and tired than before. She was at the mercantile when she spotted him through the window, loading supplies into a wagon. Her heart did an annoying little skip that she tried to ignore. That evening at supper, he took his usual place and ate with his usual quiet efficiency. But afterward, when the others had dispersed, he lingered in the hallway as she was heading upstairs. "Amelia, could I speak with you a moment in the garden, perhaps?" His formality was back, a carefulness in his tone that made her nervous. She followed him outside where the evening air was finally cooling after another scorching day. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No. Well, maybe. I do not know exactly how to say this." He removed his hat and turned it in his hands, a gesture of nervousness she had never seen from him before. "I have been thinking about you, more than I probably should, and I figured I should be honest about it rather than letting it sit unsaid between us." Her breath caught in her throat. This was exactly what she did not want, what she had promised herself she would avoid. "Ethan, I am flattered, but I am not looking for any kind of romantic attachment. I came here to teach and to build an independent life. I have no interest in courtship or marriage or any of those things." "Because someone hurt you." It was not a question, and his quiet certainty made something crack inside her chest. She turned away, staring at the vegetables growing in their neat rows. "Because I learned that love is a fairy tale told to naive girls. The real world does not work that way. Men make promises they do not keep, and women who believe them end up disappointed and alone anyway. I would rather skip the disappointment and start with the alone." He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought perhaps he would leave, would accept her rejection, and they could go back to being friendly acquaintances who shared a supper table. But instead he moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cooling air. "What if I could make it real for you?" She turned to face him, confused. "What?" "Love. The real kind, not the fairy tale version. What if I could prove to you that it exists, that not all men are liars, that some promises actually mean something?" His eyes were serious, intent. "I am not asking you to marry me or even to court me properly. I am just asking for a chance to show you that what you are running from does not have to define what you are running toward. That is ridiculous. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave enough to start over in a strange place. I know you are kind because I have watched you with the children you have met around town. I know you are practical and intelligent and trying very hard to convince yourself that you do not feel anything, when I can see in your eyes that you do." Heat flooded her cheeks, embarrassment and anger and something else she refused to name. "You are very presumptuous, Mr. Vance. Maybe, but I am also honest, and I am patient. I am not asking for an answer right now. I am just asking you to think about it. Think about whether spending the rest of your life avoiding something might be worse than taking a risk on it." He settled his hat back on his head and gave her a small nod. "Good night, Amelia. I will be in town a few more days if you want to talk, and if you do not, well, I will respect that too." She watched him walk away, her mind spinning. The audacity of it, the sheer confidence to think he could change everything she had decided about her life. And yet, underneath her indignation, something trembled. Hope, fear, the dangerous possibility that maybe, just maybe, he was right. She did not seek him out over the next 3 days, but she was acutely aware of his presence in the boarding house. They exchanged polite greetings at meals, but the easy comfort they had begun to build was replaced by a charged tension that made Miss Sarah's eyes narrow with speculation. Amelia hated it, hated feeling off balance and uncertain when she had worked so hard to build walls around her heart. On the morning Ethan was scheduled to leave again, she woke early and found him in the boarding house kitchen, drinking coffee and talking quietly with Mrs. Henderson. When he saw Amelia, he straightened, something hopeful flashing across his face before he schooled his expression to neutrality. "I will let you two talk," Mrs. Henderson said tactfully, disappearing into the pantry. Amelia poured herself coffee with shaking hands, trying to find the right words. She had spent the past 3 days thinking about nothing else, weighing practicality against possibility, fear against desire. "I do not believe in fairy tales," she said finally, not looking at him. "I do not believe in princes rescuing maidens or love conquering all. I think real life is hard and complicated and full of disappointments." "I agree with all of that." She glanced at him, surprised. "Then how can you possibly think this is a good idea?" "Because real love is not a fairy tale. It is a choice. It is waking up every day and deciding that this person matters enough to keep trying for. It is work and compromise, and sometimes it is hard as hell. But it is real, Amelia. It exists, and I think we could build something real together if you are willing to try." His words struck something deep inside her, resonating with a truth she had been avoiding. The man who had broken her heart in Memphis had offered her a fairy tale, pretty words and grand gestures that meant nothing when tested. Ethan was offering her something different, something harder but potentially more valuable: reality, honesty, a foundation built on truth rather than illusion. "I am terrified," she admitted, the words barely a whisper. "I am terrified of being hurt again, of being foolish again. I do not know if I can do this." He set down his coffee cup and took a careful step toward her, his movements slow and deliberate as if approaching a skittish horse. "Then let us take it slow. Let me court you properly. Let me prove over time that I mean what I say. And if I fail, if I prove to be just another liar, then you can go back to your original plan and I will never bother you again. That is not a fair deal. You are giving me all the power. Because you should have the power. You should get to decide what happens with your heart. I am just asking for the chance to earn it." Later, she would wonder what made her say yes. Maybe it was the absolute sincerity in his eyes. Maybe it was the way her heart had lifted every time she saw him over the past weeks, no matter how firmly she tried to suppress it. Maybe it was simply that she was tired of being afraid, tired of letting one bad experience dictate the rest of her life. "All right," she said, the word feeling both enormous and insignificant, "but slowly, and with rules. I need time to trust you, and I need you to respect my independence. I am not giving up teaching or my plans for my life. I would never ask you to. I like that you have plans and ambitions. I like that you are not looking for someone to rescue you." He smiled, that transforming expression that made her stomach flip. "I will make it real for you, Amelia. I promise you that, and unlike other men who have made you promises, I will keep it." He left for the ranch an hour later, and Amelia spent the rest of the day in a daze. What had she done? She had come to Benton to escape romance and complication, and now she had agreed to be courted by a cowboy rancher who lived 10 miles away and made her feel things she had sworn never to feel again. It was madness. It was reckless. It was terrifying. It was also, she had to admit, exciting. School started the 1st of September, and Amelia threw herself into teaching with fierce dedication. Her students ranged from tiny 6-year-olds learning their letters to gangly 15-year-olds already eyeing the door and the adult responsibilities waiting for them. She loved it immediately, the challenge and the reward of watching young minds expand and grow. This was what she had come here for, and it fulfilled her in ways she had not entirely expected. Ethan came to town twice that month, staying only a few days each time. True to his word, he courted her slowly and respectfully. He took her on a chaperoned picnic by the river with Mrs. Henderson trailing behind at a discreet distance. He brought her books from his small personal collection, surprising her with the breadth of his reading. He showed up at the schoolhouse one afternoon with lumber and tools, and spent 3 hours repairing the front steps without being asked. Most importantly, he talked to her. Really talked about his childhood in Texas, his parents who had died of fever when he was 19, his decision to move north and start fresh. He told her about the ranch, about the satisfaction of building something with his own hands, about the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the long winter nights. He made himself vulnerable in ways that scared her because she felt compelled to reciprocate. Slowly, carefully, she told him about Memphis, about her engagement to Richard, the banker's son who had courted her with expensive gifts and empty promises, about discovering he was also courting at least 2 other women, playing them all for fools, about the humiliation of breaking the engagement and facing the whispers and speculation, about deciding she would rather be alone forever than trust someone with her heart again. He was an idiot, Ethan said bluntly when she finished. They were sitting on the bench in Mrs. Henderson's garden, the October air finally cool enough to be pleasant. Not for losing you, though that was idiotic enough, but for thinking he could build something real on lies. That kind of foundation always crumbles. I was an idiot for believing him. No, you were trusting. There is a difference. He betrayed that trust which is on him, not you. He turned to face her, his expression serious. Amelia, I need you to understand something. I am not him. I am not going to promise you things I cannot deliver. I am not going to tell you pretty lies to get what I want. If I say something, I mean it, and if I cannot promise something, I will tell you that too. Can you promise me forever? The question slipped out before she could stop it, vulnerable and raw. No. No one can promise forever because we do not control the future. I could die tomorrow, you could decide you hate me next week. 1,000 things could happen that neither of us can predict. But I can promise you today. And tomorrow, I can promise you that day. And I can promise that for as long as I have breath in my body and you will have me, I will choose you. Every day I will choose you. That is what real love is. Not a guarantee of forever, but a commitment to right now, renewed every morning. Tears stung her eyes and she blinked them away furiously. That might be the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me. Then the men you have known have been fools. By November, Amelia had to admit she was falling in love, though she fought it every step of the way. Ethan was everything Richard had not been, steady and honest and genuinely interested in her thoughts and dreams. He asked about her teaching, remembered the names of her students, wanted to know her opinions on everything from politics to philosophy. He treated her as an equal partner in whatever they were building together, not as a prize to be won or a possession to be kept. The town had noticed their courtship, of course. In a place as small as Benton, privacy was a luxury no one enjoyed, but the gossip was mostly kind, approving even. Ethan was respected despite his relative newcomer status, and Amelia had won people over with her dedication to the children. They made a good match. The general consensus seemed to be Miss Sarah, predictably, had opinions. "It is highly improper how much time you spend with that man without a proper engagement," she sniffed one evening at supper. "In my day, young women knew better than to throw themselves at men." "I am not throwing myself at anyone," Amelia said mildly, cutting her chicken with precise movements. "Mr. Vance and I are getting to know each other with appropriate supervision. There is nothing improper about it. Still, men do not respect women who make themselves too available. You should be more careful." Ethan, who had been quietly eating, set down his fork and fixed Miss Sarah with a level stare. "Respectfully, Miss Sarah, you have no idea what you are talking about. I respect Amelia more than any woman I have ever known, and that has nothing to do with availability or propriety. It has to do with her character, her intelligence, and her courage. I would ask that you not make assumptions about our relationship or her behavior." The table fell silent, Mrs. Henderson staring at her plate while Mr. Peterson looked like he wished he was anywhere else. Miss Sarah's face turned red, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. "Well," she finally said, standing abruptly, "I can see when I am not wanted. Excuse me." She fled upstairs, and Mrs. Henderson sighed. "You should not have been so harsh, Ethan. She means well." "Does she? Because it seems to me she enjoys making Amelia uncomfortable, and I am tired of watching it." Later, in the garden, Amelia turned to him with exasperation and affection warring in her chest. "You did not have to defend me like that. I can handle Miss Sarah." "I know you can. But sometimes it is nice not to have to handle things alone. Sometimes it is nice to have someone in your corner fighting for you." He caught her hand, the first truly intimate touch he had initiated. "Let me be in your corner, Amelia. Let me defend you and support you and stand beside you. Not because you need it, but because I want to. Because you matter to me more than anything else in this world." Her resistance, already crumbling, shattered completely. She laced her fingers through his, feeling the calluses on his palms, the warmth of his skin. "You are making it very hard to protect my heart." "Good. Because your heart is safe with me, and the sooner you believe that, the sooner we can really start our life together." The first snow fell in December, unusual for Arkansas but not unheard of. School continued through the winter months, and Amelia bundled her students in their coats and scarves while teaching them mathematics and literature and the shape of the wider world. She had been in Benton nearly 6 months now, and it felt more like home than Memphis ever had. Ethan managed to come to town every week despite the weather, sometimes staying only a single night before heading back to the ranch. She worried about him traveling in the cold, but he assured her his horse was sure-footed and he knew the trails well. Besides, he said with that smile that still made her heart race, missing time with her was worse than any discomfort the weather could cause. On Christmas Eve, he surprised her by arriving with something large wrapped in canvas strapped to his horse. She met him outside the boarding house, curious and delighted. "What is that?" "Your Christmas present." "Well, part of it." He untied the bundle and unwrapped it to reveal a beautiful wooden shelf, clearly handmade. "For your books. I noticed they are stacked in your room, and I thought you could use somewhere proper to display them. I can install it whenever you like." She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, seeing the care and attention in every joint and curve. "You made this." "I did. Took me a few weeks, working at night after the ranch work was done. I am not much of a craftsman, but I think it turned out all right. It is beautiful." "Ethan, this is too much. It is nowhere near enough, but it is a start." He pulled a smaller package from his coat pocket. "And this is the rest." Inside was a slim volume bound in green leather, the pages edged in gold. She opened it carefully and found a collection of poems by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. On the inside cover, in Ethan's careful handwriting, were the words, "For Amelia, who taught me that real love is worth the risk. Christmas, 1882. How do I know thee? Let me count the ways," she whispered, reading the first line of the most famous poem. Then she looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "I love you. I did not want to, I tried not to, but I love you anyway." His face transformed with joy, and he pulled her into his arms right there in the street, propriety forgotten. "I love you too. I have loved you since that day you tried to catch that horse, since you showed me what courage really looks like. Marry me, Amelia. Let me make this real for you, every day for the rest of our lives." "Yes," she said, the word coming easily now without fear or hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, his lips cold from the winter air but warming quickly. It was her first kiss since Richard, and it felt nothing like those had. This was real and solid and true, a promise sealed in action rather than empty words. They married in February of 1883 in the little church next to the schoolhouse. The whole town turned out despite the cold, cramming into the pews to watch Reverend Thomas perform the ceremony. Amelia wore a simple dress of ivory wool, practical and pretty at once. Ethan wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking nervous and happy and more handsome than she had ever seen him. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire ceremony. Even Miss Sarah looked pleased, having apparently forgiven them for the supper table confrontation. Mr. Peterson gave Amelia away, having volunteered when she admitted she had no family to perform the duty. "You take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Thomas asked, his voice solemn. "I do," Ethan said, his eyes never leaving Amelia's face. "Today and every day after." When it was her turn, she spoke clearly and firmly, meaning every word. "I do." The kiss that sealed their marriage was chaste and brief, appropriate for the setting, but it carried the weight of everything they had promised each other. Real love, the kind built on truth and choice and daily commitment. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something real. They had a small celebration at the boarding house afterward, with food provided by seemingly everyone in town. People offered congratulations and advice, most of it well-meaning if occasionally intrusive. Ethan never left her side, his hand a steady presence at her back, grounding her through the overwhelming attention. As the afternoon faded into evening, they finally escaped to his wagon for the drive to the ranch. She had seen it only once before, a brief visit where he had shown her the house and introduced her to his foreman, a taciturn man named George who had nodded his approval and then disappeared into the barn. Now, as they pulled up in the winter darkness, it looked different. Not just a place Ethan lived, but her home too. The house was small but well built, 2 stories of solid wood with a porch that wrapped around the front. Inside, Ethan had clearly made an effort, cleaning until everything gleamed and building up the fire so the main room was warm and welcoming. Her books, transported earlier in the week, were waiting to be placed on the shelf he had made. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," he said, lifting her easily to carry her over the threshold. "Are you ready for this? Ranch life is not easy and winters can be lonely out here." She cupped his face in her hands, studying the man she had married. Strong and honest and true, exactly what he had promised to be. "I am ready. As long as I am with you, I am ready for anything." That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, he made good on every promise. He was gentle and patient, understanding her nervousness and taking time to show her that physical intimacy could be beautiful rather than frightening. They learned each other slowly, mapping skin and preferences, building trust even in this most vulnerable of acts. "You are everything," he whispered against her hair afterward, holding her close. "My home, my heart, my reality. Thank you for giving me a chance to prove it." She fell asleep in his arms, safer and more content than she had ever thought possible. The next months taught her the rhythm of ranch life. She woke before dawn to make breakfast while Ethan handled the early morning chores. He taught her to ride properly, not the side-saddle style of her youth, but astride like a ranch woman, practical and secure. She learned to recognize different cattle by their markings, to watch for signs of illness or injury, to respect the hard physical labor that went into keeping everything running. Spring brought new calves, dozens of wobbly-legged creatures that needed watching and care. Ethan was busy nearly every hour of daylight, and Amelia found ways to help despite her continued teaching responsibilities. The school board had agreed she could keep her position even after marriage, a rare concession that she treasured. 3 days a week, Ethan would drive her into town before dawn and pick her up after school. The other 3 days, she worked on the ranch, gradually becoming as comfortable with cattle as she was with children. George, the foreman, warmed to her after she successfully helped deliver a breech calf, getting covered in blood and afterbirth without complaining. "You will do," he said gruffly afterward, which Ethan later told her was high praise indeed. By summer, they had settled into a comfortable partnership. Ethan never made decisions about the ranch without consulting her, treating her as an equal owner rather than just the rancher's wife. She, in turn, shared everything about her teaching, knowing he genuinely cared about her work and her students. They talked through problems together, supported each other's goals, and built something stronger than either could have managed alone. It was not always easy. They argued sometimes, usually about money or priorities, or the thousand small conflicts that arose when two independent people tried to merge their lives. But they had promised each other honesty, and so they fought fair, talking through disagreements until they found solutions that worked for both of them. And afterward, they always reconnected, reminding each other why they had chosen this in the first place. In August, Amelia missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure, then made an appointment with the doctor in Little Rock. When he confirmed what she suspected, she felt a complicated tangle of emotions: joy, fear, excitement, and uncertainty all at once. She told Ethan that night after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. They had talked about children in abstract terms, agreeing they wanted them eventually, but this felt suddenly very concrete and immediate. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice strange. "As certain as I can be." The doctor said probably late March or early April. He sat down heavily, staring at her with an expression she could not quite read. For a terrifying moment, she thought he might be unhappy, might not want this after all. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Amelia, I cannot believe this. I cannot believe I get to have this with you." Relief flooded through her, and she clung to him just as tightly. "You are happy." Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, maybe. I do not know the first thing about being a father, but happy, yes, so happy I cannot find words for it. They sat together on the porch as the sun set, making plans and dreaming aloud about the future. Amelia would teach until December, then take time off to prepare for the baby and recover afterward. They would need to add on to the house, maybe another bedroom and a proper nursery. They would need supplies, furniture, a cradle. The list felt overwhelming and wonderful at the same time. As autumn arrived, Amelia's body began to change in ways both uncomfortable and miraculous. She was sick most mornings, exhausted by mid-afternoon, and increasingly unable to fit into her regular clothes. Mrs. Henderson helped her let out some dresses, and sew new ones that accommodated her expanding belly. The women of Benton, many of whom were mothers themselves, offered advice and support that she had not expected but deeply appreciated. Ethan became even more protective than usual, worrying about her riding horses or lifting heavy objects or doing any of the 100 tasks she had taken on at the ranch. She found it sweet and annoying in equal measure, torn between appreciating his care and asserting her continued capability. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she told him one afternoon when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am perfectly capable of managing normal tasks. I know that, but let me help anyway. Let me take care of you." She saw the fear underneath his hovering, the terror that something might go wrong, that he might lose her or the baby or both. So she softened, letting him carry the laundry while she walked beside him. It was not about capability, she realized. It was about love, about his need to protect what mattered most to him. In December, she taught her last day of school until the following autumn. The children threw her a small party, presenting her with handmade gifts and cards wishing her well. Some of the older girls asked questions about the baby with eager curiosity, while the boys looked vaguely uncomfortable with the whole topic. She hugged each of them goodbye, promising to return when she was ready. Winter that year was harsh, with snow and ice that kept them mostly confined to the ranch. Amelia spent the long evenings knitting tiny garments and reading aloud to Ethan from the books he had given her. They talked about names, finally settling on Jacob for a boy and Alina for a girl, both family names that honored the loved ones they had lost. As her due date approached, Ethan arranged for Mrs. Henderson and the doctor to stay at the ranch for a week, refusing to risk a delay if the baby came quickly. Amelia was torn between gratitude and embarrassment, unused to being the center of so much attention. The labor began on a cold morning in late March, starting with a dull ache in her back that gradually intensified. Mrs. Henderson took charge immediately, sending Ethan and George out of the house with instructions not to return until summoned. The next hours were a blur of pain and effort, harder than anything Amelia had ever experienced. Mrs. Henderson coached her through each contraction, wiping her face with cool cloths and offering encouragement. "You are doing wonderfully, dear. I know it hurts, but you are almost there. Just a little more." When the baby finally arrived with a wail that seemed impossibly loud from such a small creature, Amelia felt tears streaming down her face. A boy, healthy and strong, with a good set of lungs and his father's light brown hair. "Jacob," she whispered, holding him for the first time. "Welcome to the world, Jacob Vance." Mrs. Henderson cleaned them both up, then went to fetch Ethan, who appeared in the doorway looking pale and terrified. When he saw Amelia sitting up in bed holding their son, his face crumpled with relief and wonder. "Is he all right? Are you all right? We are both fine. Come meet your son." He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break something, then sank onto the edge of the bed. When Amelia placed Jacob in his arms, Ethan stared at the baby with an expression of such complete awe that she felt her heart might burst. "He is perfect," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Amelia, he is absolutely perfect. Look at his tiny fingers. Look at his face. We made this. We made a person. We did, and we will raise him to be strong and kind and true, just like his father." Jacob grew quickly, thriving in the fresh air and open space of the ranch. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and surprisingly good-natured considering the disruption he had caused to their lives. Amelia had never been so exhausted or so happy, navigating the challenges of new motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. Ethan was a devoted father, doing far more than most men of the time. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Jacob during fussy nights, and spent hours simply watching the baby sleep with wonder on his face. Amelia loved him even more for it, grateful beyond words that she had taken the risk on him. By autumn, she was ready to return to teaching, at least part-time. Mrs. Henderson agreed to watch Jacob during school hours, and Amelia threw herself back into work she loved. It was exhausting managing both roles, but she had never been one to choose easy over fulfilling. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by hard work and deep contentment. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing to over 500 head of cattle and becoming known throughout Arkansas for quality stock. Jacob grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch and begging his mother for stories. When he was 3, they welcomed a daughter, Eleanor, who had her mother's dark hair and fierce independence. Amelia continued teaching until she and Ethan decided they wanted to focus entirely on the ranch and their growing family. She missed the schoolhouse sometimes, but she found other ways to contribute, helping establish a library in Benton and teaching Sunday school at the church. Ethan built additions onto the house as needed, expanding it from the small 2-story into a sprawling home that accommodated their family and the occasional hired hand. They faced challenges, of course. Years when drought or disease threatened the herd. Times when money was tight and they had to make difficult choices. A terrifying week when Jacob broke his arm falling from a horse and infection set in, requiring around-the-clock care until the fever finally broke. Through it all, they relied on each other, that foundation of truth and commitment they had built holding firm no matter what tested it. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan took her back to the garden at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, which had become something of a tradition for them. The town had grown over the decade, but the garden remained largely unchanged, a pocket of peace in an expanding world. "You remember the first time I told you I loved you?" he asked, sitting beside her on the same bench where they had shared so many conversations. "Right here in this garden with snow falling all around us. Of course I remember. You asked me to marry you and I said yes, and my whole life changed. Do you regret it? Any of it?" She turned to him, studying the face she knew as well as her own. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and there was gray threading through his hair now. He looked older, tired from years of hard work and responsibility. But when he smiled at her, it was the same smile that had won her heart all those years ago, not for a single moment. "You promised to make love real for me, and you have kept that promise every day. This life we have built, our children, the ranch, all of it is more than I ever dreamed possible. You have given me everything, Ethan. We have given it to each other. That is what partnership means." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know we cannot afford extravagances, but I wanted to give you something to mark the occasion. 10 years of choosing each other every day." Inside the box was a simple gold band, engraved with the date of their wedding. She slipped it onto her finger beside her plain wedding ring, blinking back tears. "It is perfect. You are perfect." "Well, not perfect," she amended, making him laugh, "but perfect for me, which is all that matters." "You thought love was a fairy tale," he said, echoing those long-ago words. "And I promised I would make it real for you. Have I kept that promise?" "Every day," she whispered. "Every single day." They kissed in the garden, surrounded by the flowers and vegetables that had witnessed so much of their journey. Real love, she thought, was nothing like a fairy tale. It was harder and messier and more complicated than any story could capture. But it was also infinitely more valuable, built on choice and commitment and the decision to keep showing up, even when things were difficult. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their children's lives. Jacob grew tall and strong, choosing to stay on the ranch and learn everything his father could teach him about raising cattle. Alina surprised them all by developing a passion for teaching, eventually taking over Amelia's old position at the schoolhouse. They married and had children of their own, filling the ranch house with grandchildren who called Amelia Nana, and climbed all over Ethan like he was a particularly comfortable tree. As they grew older, Ethan and Amelia gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Jacob, though they remained involved in the big decisions. They had built something lasting, something that would continue beyond their lifetimes, and the satisfaction of that was immense. On a warm evening in May of 1910, Amelia sat on the porch watching the sun set over land they had worked for nearly 3 decades. Ethan dozed in the chair beside her, his hand clasped loosely in hers. Inside, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Alina's voice calling them to settle down. It was an ordinary moment, unremarkable in its simplicity. But Amelia thought it was perfect. She thought about that young woman who had arrived in Benton in 1882, so certain that love was a lie and independence was the only path to happiness. She had been wrong about so much, though right about some things too. Love was not a fairy tale, not the fantasy version sold in books and magazines, but real love, the kind built on honesty and commitment and daily choice that existed. That was worth every risk. Ethan had promised to make love real for her, and he had spent 27 years keeping that promise. Not with grand gestures or flowery words, but with small, consistent acts of devotion. With morning, coffee made just the way she liked it, with listening to her fears and dreams. With building a life and a family and a legacy together, brick by brick and day by day. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, opening his eyes to find her watching him. "Just that I am glad I said yes, that day in the garden when you asked me to take a chance. I am glad I found the courage to try." He squeezed her hand gently. "Me too. You are still my everything, Amelia, today just like every day before, and you are mine, today and always." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Amelia felt the deep contentment of a life well lived. She had come to Arkansas searching for independence and found something better. Partnership, love, home. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real one, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. Years later, when their time finally came as it comes for everyone, they went peacefully. First Ethan in the winter of 1918, and then Amelia the following spring. They were buried side by side in the Benton cemetery, their graves marked with simple stones bearing their names and the years they had lived. But their true legacy was not in stone. It was in the ranch that still bore the Vance name, run by their descendants with the same integrity and hard work they had modeled. It was in the lives they had touched, the community they had helped build, the love they had proven was real. On Amelia's stone, at Alina's insistence, they carved a simple phrase beneath her name. She thought love was a fairy tale until the cowboy said, "I'll make it real for you," and he did. It was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, just as Ethan had always promised it would be. The end of their story, but really just another beginning, because real love does not end with death. It continues in the children and grandchildren who carry forward the lessons learned, the values instilled. It continues in the land they tended, the town they helped build, the lives they touched with their quiet example of what commitment and partnership really mean. Jacob Vance stood at his parents' graves years after they had both passed. His own children and grandchildren gathered around him. He was an old man now, weathered and gray, but he remembered everything. The way his father had looked at his mother as if she was the most precious thing in the world. The way she had looked back with equal love and respect. The way they had worked together, argued and made up, built something lasting through sheer determination and devotion. "Tell us about Grandpa and Nana," one of the great-grandchildren asked, tugging on his hand. "Tell us the story." So Jacob did, just as he had told it dozens of times before and would tell dozens of times again. He told them about a young woman who came to Benton running from heartbreak, certain she would never trust love again. He told them about a cowboy rancher who saw past her walls and promised to make love real for her. He told them about the life they built together, the challenges they faced, the family they raised. He told them the truth, because that was what Ethan and Amelia would have wanted. "The important thing to understand," he finished, looking at the young faces watching him with rapt attention, "is that it was not easy. Love never is, but it was real. Every day they chose each other. Every day they kept their promises, and that made all the difference." As the family walked back to the ranch house, leaving flowers on the graves, the wind rustled through the trees and the evening sun cast long shadows across the cemetery. In the distance, cattle lowed contentedly, and somewhere a child laughed. Life continued, as it always does, built on the foundations laid by those who came before. Amelia and Ethan's story was not unique in many ways. Countless people across countless generations have fallen in love, married, raised families, and built lives together. But every love story is unique to the people living it, and theirs had been exactly what they both needed when they needed it most. A second chance. A proof that real love exists, not in fairy tales but in daily choices and kept promises. Eleanor, meanwhile, had taken her mother's love of teaching and her father's steady determination, and combined them into her own legacy. She had taught 3 generations of Benton children, including her own grandchildren, passing on not just reading and arithmetic, but also the values her parents had modeled. She told them about her mother arriving in Benton, scared and determined never to love again. She told them about her father's patience and honesty, about the courtship that had won Amelia over. She made sure they understood that real love was not what you saw in magazines or heard in songs. It was harder and better than that. The ranch itself had evolved over the decades, adapting to changing times while maintaining its core values. Jacob ran it with his sons, modernizing where it made sense but never forgetting the principles Ethan had taught him. Fair dealing, quality stock, respect for the land and the animals. When people asked about the Vance Ranch, they spoke of its reputation for integrity as much as its successful cattle operation. In Benton, the schoolhouse where Amelia had taught eventually became a community center, but her influence lingered. A plaque on the wall honored her years of service, and older residents still spoke of Miss Crawford, later Mrs. Vance, who had shaped so many young minds with her passion for learning and her insistence that education was the key to opportunity. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, where so much of Ethan and Amelia's early courtship had taken place, eventually closed when she passed away in 1895. But the garden remained, maintained by the new owners who understood its significance to the community. Young couples courted there, following in the footsteps of the cowboy, and the teacher who had proven that real love was possible even for those who had stopped believing in it. The church where they had married continued to host weddings, and Reverend Thomas's successors often spoke of the Vance marriage as an example of Christian commitment and partnership. Not perfect, because no human relationship is perfect, but real and enduring. Built on the kind of foundation that could weather any storm, and through it all, the land itself bore witness. The fields where Ethan and Amelia had worked side by side, planting and harvesting and tending. The river where they had picnicked and taught their children to fish. The hills where they had ridden together, surveying their growing holdings and dreaming of the future. Arkansas changed around them, modernizing and growing, but the essential character of the place remained. Hard work, community, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. Their story became part of the local folklore, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But at its heart remained the simple truth. A woman who thought love was a lie, a man who promised to make it real. A lifetime spent keeping that promise day by day through joy and sorrow, success and failure until death finally parted them. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The Vance family continued to gather at the ranch for holidays and celebrations, generation after generation returning to the place Ethan and Amelia had built. They sat on the expanded porch, now running the length of the house, and told stories about the ancestors who had started it all. Children played in the same yard where Jacob and Alina had played. Grandmothers taught granddaughters to cook using Amelia's recipes. Grandfathers taught grandsons to ride using Ethan's methods, and always, always, there was love. Not the fairytale kind, but the real kind. The kind that showed up every day and did the work. The kind that kept promises and built futures. The kind that Ethan had shown Amelia existed, and that they had modeled for everyone who came after them. In the town of Benton, Arkansas, where the story began that hot July day in 1882, people still sometimes spoke of the cowboy and the teacher. How she had arrived with a broken heart and a determination to never love again. How he had seen past her walls and promised her something better than a fairy tale. How they had built a life together that proved real love was not only possible but worth every risk, every fear, every moment of vulnerability. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Arkansas hills and the air filled with the sound of crickets and distant cattle, it was almost possible to imagine them still there. Ethan and Amelia Vance, sitting on their porch hand in hand, watching the sky turn colors and counting the ways they had kept their promises to each other. Today, just like every day before. Until the end of their days and beyond, into the legacy they left behind, because real love does not end. It transforms and continues, passed down like precious heirlooms from one generation to the next. It lives in the values taught, the examples set, the stories told. And as long as people remember, as long as they believe that love can be real and true and lasting, then Ethan and Amelia's promise continues to be kept. She thought love was a fairy tale until the cowboy said, "I will make it real for you." And he did. Every day for the rest of their lives, he did. That was their story. That was their truth. That was their legacy, and it was enough.